right, welcome to our 1 o'clock panel at Time Lord Fest. Time Lord Fest Unite yesterday. Oh, that's a time travel joke. You stand up here and do that. Do it quick, please, because, all right.
It says Time Lords Unite yesterday.
Oh, that's really cute. Hey, just for you for that, you get a sonic screwdriver. By the way, just remember, every panel that happens in this room, the other rooms might have cool panels. We have the celebrities from Doctor Who, and we actually have all the best toys that we give away. So we grind you. All right, so my name is Ken Smiley. I'm the host of this event, and thank you. But we are very honored to have with us our first overseas guest from this series itself, Mr. Robert Allsoop. Robert, tell us, what do you do?
What do I do? I tell people I glue things together, really.
They're preschool.
Yeah, exactly. I make novelty items. But more specifically, I run a small company that makes props and costumes for lots of different elements of the entertainment industry, so films, TV, theatre, and sometimes Doctor Who.
Oh! Has anyone here heard of Doctor Who? It's a slightly empty show. I don't know if it's hit your market yet. And how long have you been working with and for and to Doctor Who? All the prepositions.
I think my first job on the show was making Sylvester's question mark umbrella back in the 80s.
Ah, so the question mark. Does anyone here remember Sylvester McCoy? He made the question mark on the umbrella. See, you can make an umbrella handle. Good job, man.
I think I made about 5.
Man, that's more than I've ever made.
That's more than I wanted to make.
So, how did you get your start? How did someone say, hey, I want to be on Doctor Who and make spacesuits for a living? How does one go about doing that? Is there an application? Do I go on, like, Craigslist?
No, you just have to be young, enthusiastic, and slightly stupid.
Well, that was definitely me at one point. So.
Yeah, it helps if you're in the UK.
Oh.
But in those days, you could actually phone up the BBC and ask to see someone in their costume department and ask them to give you some work.
Do you still remember their number?
It was 7438,000. That was the old TV Centre phone number. 0207 7438,000.
Not that he has to memorize or anything. No. And so how does that story go?
Well, me and a few friends decided that we wanted to work on the show and phoned the BBC costume designer's office and asked to see some of the BBC costume designers who we knew were likely to be working on the show, and we took photos of our work. And it just happened to be at the right time, and they were up for giving work to outside contractors. And that's kind of how I started on my own, although when I did things like the umbrella handle and a few other bits and pieces, I was working for a very brilliant prop maker at the time. So I did some work through another contractor, and then some of it on my own, and with a bunch of friends.
So the beginning of your career reminds me of Peter Sellers and Being There, where you did the amazing because no one told you you couldn't.
Exactly, yeah. No one said you're not allowed to do that, so we just did it.
Isn't that an inspirational message? The more you know.
You're welcome. It wouldn't really work that way today because there is no BBC costume designer's office, and it all works very differently now. But in those days, you could do something like that quite easily.
So your first thing was the handle? Was that the first prop you made?
I think it was, yeah. And then I think the next one was some helmets for Dragonfire. and a few other bits around that period. Also, friends of mine were helping with some of the creatures at the time, the tetraps, and I went and helped glue fur onto those. So quite a few of those early Sylvester episodes I had a little bit to do on.
So how was the feel in the set? Since it sounds like it was the BBC prop and costume department, you were in?
I was mostly working through the costume department, but as an outworker.
Well, what was the feel back then? Was it a sense of camaraderie? Did everyone know everyone, and it was kind of a brotherhood, or?
Probably not generally within the BBC, but amongst the kind of younger crowd of people who I was working with, yeah, we were all quite keen and new, and John Nathan Turner, the producer, was up for using new people on the show, and we were too young and stupid to realise that you couldn't do it, so we just did.
Here's an interesting question. Does anyone here know who Jonathan Nathan Turner was? He was the Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat of that era, essentially. He was the showrunner. You've worked at, and your next panel, you'll be discussing your work in the new series.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of insight. What was it like working under Nathan Turner as opposed to Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat? How does it feel different working under those showrunners?
The main difference is I used to have some direct involvement with John Nathan Turner, whereas now there are so many kind of layers of management within the BBC that I don't really ever get to interact directly with the current producer. It's just the way the BBC works is structured very differently, so I don't ever speak directly to the producer, but I sometimes get feedback back that he liked something that I did. Occasionally I hear back via the costume designer, who is my real boss on the production.
Well, we're going to open it up right now to questions briefly. Does anybody have any questions so far about this gentleman and his 7th Thunder? I have one here and one there and one I saw back there. So you first.
Yeah, I know you did the episode of for the Handbot one.
Yeah.
And how long it take about to do that robot?
We're going to discuss that in the next panel.
Okay.
We'll hit it real briefly right now, but we'll discuss that in length in a couple of hours.
Okay.
But roughly how long did a handbot take to make?
Well, we made, I think, 5 or 6 of them, and they were done really quickly, because I think we only had about 2.5 to 3 weeks from the initial meeting to being on set with them, so it was 3 weeks maximum, maybe a little less.
Well, here's an interesting question. Compared to those 2 or 3 weeks you had, how long did you have to make the ancient Hemivore?
I think it felt like a little longer, but I don't know, it's so long ago when we did that.
Yeah.
I can't honestly remember quite how many days we had, but it did feel a little more relaxed time-wise.
Really?
And we actually had a fitting on the actor, whereas nowadays you don't often get a chance to fit the costume on the actor until the day of filming.
Well, I definitely could tell by watching some classic Doctor Who, some of the costumes didn't quite fit.
Mm-hmm.
So they were baggy in certain areas, and other areas not baggy.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of, that was part of the charm. I'm sure it was for you too. How the special effects were not amazing, and that allowed for, I think, at least for me, growing up watching the show, the costumes, for one, it wasn't CGI, it was all real. So the monsters looked like something could actually reach out and bite you. Plus, they could fill in every detail, prop and costume-wise, and a lot of things that left the imagination.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the wonderful things of, before all the amazing techniques and huge budget you have to work with now, back then they left more to the imagination, and the dialogue and the story itself helped drive the actual visual effects. What, you agree, disagree?
Yeah, up to a point, you have more time to develop a story because most episodes were 4-parters rather than the kind of 45-minute format we have now. So you could have a bit more character development in the story. But they did have some very clever people making some of the masks and costumes at the time. So I think some of it still stands up today.
Excellent. Another question was over here. Yes.
Hi, I was wondering, in the vastness of your career creating, what piece are you the most proud of?
It probably varies from what I've been working on at the time, but I'm quite pleased with the way the Time Lords in the 50th anniversary show turned out.
Perfect.
That was an amazing panel. Was anybody here earlier at his Time Lord Road panel? Those who did not arrive early, he gave an actual workshop, a tutorial on how to create your own Time Lord robes. And are some of those over there?
The sort of orange-coloured one is.
The orange-colored one. Is it the furthest one there?
The furthest away.
The furthest away.
Yeah.
And that's actually from the patterns and measurements from one of the costumes during the Deadly Assassin episode.
Yeah, a friend of mine has one of the originals and let me take some measurements, so it's all based on that, really.
So, we had one more question back here, didn't we? Somebody back there? No? Yes, you.
Obviously, there's probably a lot of during the episodes. I like to make a lot of props and stuff myself, but when you're, I'm guessing that a lot of stuff was made for the program itself. You know, we need this, we need that. But do you ever doodle around making something and then, you know, hey, this would kind of be neat going together, and then bring that into the show? Like, probably use that somewhere.
I don't really do that. I think it has happened one or two times in the past. I think that happened maybe way back in the old series with the chameleon robots. I had a feeling that was made and then introduced into the show as a pre-existing thing.
Hold on. You did the chameleon robot?
No.
Oh. I'd not be impressed, but...
I was too young then.
Okay, every time Robert and I talk, I keep saying, like, did you make this robot? No. I'm like, oh. And like, I did the hand pod. Yeah, you made a robot. Robots are awesome.
Yeah, make some robots, not many.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone's life goal is to make a robot. Well, pictures. Yes, do you have your slides ready?
I don't know.
Yes.
I guess. We have a set of classic Who pictures. At least a dozen. Yeah.
Okay, let's bring on the first picture. And what do we have here? We have, is this...
This is from the previous panel.
Okay.
So there should be a section.
Is there another section or another disc?
The first photo is Sylvester holding his umbrella.
Okay, so the first photo is someone holding an umbrella is the first photo.
But I think for this system they're just having to work through the whole thing, maybe. I don't know. Back to the start again now.
Okay, is there a root directory you can go to, perhaps? No? Is there a second Delta? That was the funniest joke, by the way. The entire movie Zoolander was in the menu for it. He said, "Welcome to the Zoolander Delta." Only joke in the movie we're watching.
Oh, actually, it's a different disc, isn't it, Ken?
Yeah, I believe it's on a different diskette, ma'am. If you put in a different, it's compact disc, light is emitted. So it's sound.
There should be a few photos, not so many as we didn't have digital cameras then.
It was the long ago. Yes. It was the time when pterodactyls ruled the sky. So, what's amazing is that you've been doing this so long that you were in part of the classic series and you're incredibly involved in the modern series.
Yeah, I've been quite fortunate. There have been big gaps in between where I've done nothing on the show and been busy doing other things, but I think there's only maybe 4 or 5 of us who've worked on classic Who and new Who.
Oh, look, it looks like we might have an image coming up here. And what is this?
This is the wrong section.
This is not the photo you're looking for.
I think we're on the right disc, I think, but the old Who starts with a picture of Sylvester McCoy.
Is that folder there?
I don't know, that's just
I don't
strange
know.
numbers.
How about the number 1? What does the number 1 look like? Going back there. It's,
All very mysterious.
okay, let's see what this is. Zenith, that's good. Number 1. Is that a file or just a paper? There we go!
So that's him as he was then, holding his umbrella.
Okay. And that umbrella handle was made by Mr. Allsoop.
We kind of covered that one, really.
What do we have next then?
Now this is a shot from Dragonfire, and those helmets were the kind of second thing I did on the show. Again, that was working for another guy at the time, and the infamous Candyman.
Ah!
Okay.
And tell us more about, before you go to the next slide, tell us more about how did the Candyman come about?
It came about from the makeup designer on the show at the time, a lady called Dorka Niragic.
That's a weird department for that to come from.
Yeah, it's a very good department, but I don't know how it worked out, but she decided she wanted to design it, and for some reason, I'm not quite sure how it came about, she asked me to make it for her, and it was kind of slightly scary to be making something that I thought all the fans are going to hate, because it was quite an outrageous idea and more sort of like something from a comic strip than a science fiction thing. But we just tried to make it as convincing as we could.
Actually, it's become quite a cult classic, actually.
Well, I hope people have grown to like it over the years.
I do believe there actually may be a Candyman underground toy. I think one came out a few years ago.
Oh, I'll look out for that.
All right, what's the next slide we have for that?
It's him again.
And he's staring down the man of candy.
Oh.
And was any actual candy used making the Candyman, or just, well, did you eat it?
We did actually buy real sweets as reference.
Okay.
Because, you know, if you're doing something like that, then to get some kind of quality into it, you want to make the sweets as kind of real sweet-like as possible. So you want a bit of good reference, and they get to eat too.
And what do we have here? I recognize those gods.
Those are the gods gods of Ragnarok.
They are,
yes.
And what episode were they from?
They're from Greatest Show of the Galaxy, which was a slightly strange episode to work on, as it was filmed in a tent in the BBC car park.
Yeah, if your agent called you now and said that you've got a gig in an old shed in someone's yard, that would sound rather sketchy, but back then, that's the BBC.
They had a big problem with some of the studios. They discovered that they had asbestos in some of the studios, and while the studios were shut for having that sorted out, they built a big tent on the car park at BBC Elstree, and for a lot of the interiors, it was filmed in a tent. Conveniently, a lot of the story was set in a tent, so that helped. But even some of the TARDIS interior stuff was filmed in a tent for that.
Would you like to take this moment, Robert, to ask questions? And of the 3 best questions, we'll give a prize.
That sounds like a good idea.
All right,
yes.
3 quick questions. Quick questions. Okay, you. You first.
Before getting into, getting associated with costuming for BBC, how did you get into costuming in the first place? College?
I'd always made things, and I started off, like a lot of you guys, trying to figure out how to make copies of Doctor Who costumes, really. And I'd been to the exhibitions that were in the UK at the time that had some of the real stuff in the show. So I kind of taught myself up to a point, and then I went to college and did a 3-year theatre design course, and I was able to kind of learn how to make things in a more professional way then. So yeah, it's partly self-taught and partly trained doing theatre design.
What's amazing, most people I know that have graduated degrees in theatre design now work at Target. And you skipped that step.
Yeah, I kind of went straight from college to working on, there was a strange kind of science fiction show called Max Headroom at the time.
What did you do at Max Headroom? That's awesome. I don't know about that.
I think I made 2 or 3 of his jackets. So I knew the effects company where they made the prosthetics, and they'd already done the first few jackets. They just like a fiberglass jacket, and I made a few of those even before leaving college. And then I went to work for a brilliant prop maker, Martin Adams, who worked on Doctor Who and worked on loads of films like Highlander and Brazil and The Last Emperor, and I went on from there. Next question.
Materials did you use to make the costumes?
Which one?
How about the Candyman would be a good question, actually. What made the Candyman? What materials?
He was, the Candyman was a whole bunch of materials: aluminium, foam, latex, fiberglass, pretty much everything you can think of went into that one.
Well, we just heard a triad of questions. We heard 3, correct? We heard 2. Well, I'm used to the metric system. Okay. Well, we need one more. The young lady right there, I know, is actually with red. You're the first one immediately to raise your hand. And we'll get to you soon, I promise. Both of them, they seem very torn, so move those last questions because they might fight. And
Let's get both of them here.
Yes, all right. Quickly stand and ask.
Are you ever interested in costume making, designing, that sort of thing?
When you were, when he was what? When he was a child. Oh, okay. Were you a child once?
I think I was, yeah.
That's good.
And some people would say I still am, maybe. Yeah, I was always interested in making things, and it wasn't necessarily always costume. It might have been puppets or masks, but it was also something around that. So, yeah, I was always trying to make stuff, and some of that was costume, although I didn't really think of it as costume. I was just like a kid trying to make a spacesuit or something like that.
All right. Well, for the second question there.
I just wanted to know what your hardest prop you've ever made.
The hardest prop, the most difficult to make, or the one that's actually the most impervious to damage by mortal weapons? The most difficult to make.
Oh, that's a tough question. The most difficult Doctor Who one to make? Probably at the time it may have been the Candyman, partly because I wasn't that experienced at the time. I was still quite young, so I probably wouldn't find it as hard to make now as I did then. But just because of my lack of experience at the time, it was probably the Candyman.
All right, well, those are the myriad of questions. Which one of those 3 questions and comments do you think was prize-worthy?
Maybe the last one?
Which one?
The last one?
The last one? Okay, who just asked the last question? You did. Oh, are you 2 together? You 2 both in your TARDIS shirts? Oh. I once had a girlfriend and she would make me dress up and match with her too. But this is awesome. Like, yeah, that's really cool. We were both horses. All right, I have a prize for you. I have
The Tigers.
This is a 1970s
All right.
Doctor Who creature.
All right, give us a drum roll. Drum roll.
The Tigers.
You get that! Open it. Tell us what you got. You're probably better at this than I am.
Thank you.
It looks like a mug, or something that they're trying to protect the Al-Qaeda. That's a protection. Well done. You get whatever that is.
You get a prize. You get a prize.
License. All right. Well, let's go on to the next slide. And what do we have up on the screen there?
This was an episode called Battlefield. Well, yeah.
Yeah, by the very title, it sounds rather combative.
Yes, indeed. What they really wanted was something that probably looked like Transformers, and what they ended up with was that. Because there was very little budget. So the knights in that were a combination of some bits pulled out of a BBC costume store and some bits which I custom made. Because in those days there was the BBC costume store, so you could raid it and pull things out of it and save a lot of money that way. Whereas nowadays there is no BBC costume store, so everything has to be either built from scratch or hired in from an outside costume house.
Well, which bits did you make on these?
On these, I made the visors of the helmets, but the helmets were from a previous episode, I think. I made the shoulders of the armour, and the arm bits, and the leg armour, and the breastplates came from stock. So it was a real kind of mix of old stock and new bits put together, and then we kind of repainted the whole thing and tried to make it look like it matched.
How about the laser guns?
Laser guns, not my department. That'll be visual effects.
No robots?
No laser guns, no robots. I don't know why I'm here, really.
Robert is kind enough to stay, or unfortunate enough to stay in the guest room at my house. And
It's a glamorous life.
it's a glamorous life, being a movie star. And he got to see that my restroom is decorated RoboCop. So I quite like robots with guns. So whenever he does a robot or anything gun related, I'm really excited.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Thank you. Like he could of the day, like tweet it. Like today I made a gun. Tweet that.
Okay.
And what do we have right there?
A bit more Battlefield. This was just another of the, again, it's a stock BBC helmet, and we just created a new visor for it that was half mirrored so the guy could see out of it and it looked shiny on the outside.
So that must have made costume creation very quick. You had so much to pull from that you could grab and modify for the story.
Absolutely, and if you watch the show a lot in the 70s, you can see a lot of the same costumes reappear, and even some props appear from other film productions that were nothing to do with the BBC. I think even some of the spacesuit backpacks from 2001 used to crop up as bits of set dressing in Blake 7 at the time.
Did you do anything with Blake 7? Because that was a little before then.
It was a bit before my time. Blake 7.
Were you a fan of the series?
I was, yeah, I used to watch it.
Okay. What do we have here? Yes, this is a very important scene.
Still Battlefield, this is Jean Marsh, and I made her a breastplate in a very, very old traditional kind of theatre method.
That's very cool.
Of, where you just, it's stiffened felt covered in a metallic leather, basically, so it's a really old school theatre technique, but it sort of was appropriate to the job at the time, and it kind of worked. I just thought it was quite a nice picture.
So there's two things, the breastplate and the umbrella handle that would.
Yes, exactly. Oh, and this is Ghostlight, which I think was the last Sylvester episode to be filmed, although it wasn't the last one broadcast, but I was asked to make the costume for Light, which was quite a challenging one at the time.
Why was it challenging?
Because it was much more costumey than armour, and what I'd done most of by that point was armour. So this was a bit more fabric-y.
Did it stretch you as a artisan to do this?
Yeah, I think it did, but I was very pleased to be doing it, and it was quite a nice design by the late, great Ken True, the costume designer, who always did nice drawings. So I think his drawing's probably next up on the disc, actually.
Next up on the disc.
Next.
I have sent
And next slide.
Oh, okay, well we skip straight to
The Ebola virus.
Oh, that's hidden creature for the Black Lagoon.
So this is Curse of Fenric, and I didn't do the head for this one. My good friends Sue and Steve Seymour and Steve Mansfield did all of the heads for all of the herbivores, and I got the job of doing the rest of it.
Well, how did that happen? How did you end up doing the body and somebody else the head of a creature?
That was pretty much the way the BBC worked at the time, where mostly the head of anything would be handled by makeup and the body would be handled by costume. So if the two looked like they went together, it was usually a happy accident. Fortunately, we both knew each other and were kind of working together on it, although for different departments, so it hopefully looked like it all belonged as one thing.
And they made the herbivore teal, because teal goes with anything. So they were very fashion conscious as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Blue was the colour of the period then.
It quite was.
Yeah.
In the 70s, it was browns,
Yeah.
oranges, and we were at a logo for the 2005 era.
Yes, this is telling us that the next bit is that, really.
Okay,
So we don't want to do that
All
yet,
right,
do we?
we're not ready for that panel. So now it's time for, we've got about 8 minutes for some Q&A. Raise your hands with the questions. Back there in the white blouse.
Biggest costume fail.
Biggest costume tail?
Fail.
Fail.
Yeah, what did you?
What is the worst job you've done?
That's a terrible question.
I know. How badly?
Some people might say the Candyman, I don't know.
That's me.
I don't know, I have to say most things are fairly successful. I can't think of anything that was a huge disaster, but if there was, I probably blanked it from my mind anyway. I've worked on some terrible projects, but I don't think that what we came up with was necessarily what made them terrible. So I can't really answer that one, I don't think.
Oh, I have a question very quickly. Do we have Arthur Dykeman in the room, perhaps? Is Arthur in here? We do have you from the Guardians. You from the Guardians Gallery. Come on up here, young man. Give us a round of applause. This gentleman is from the Guardians of Gallifrey. And they actually helped fly Robert over from England to be here with us today. So, introduce yourself.
I'm Ben Metro.
Okay. Well, Ben, let's give Ben and the Guardians of Gallifrey a giant round of applause. And it's because of their group that gave us the first little bit of financial capital that allowed us to buy the airline ticket so that we have our first Doctor Who guest from England, Mr. Allsoop, join us. So a round of applause for the fan club, the Guardians of Gallifrey. Thank you so much. And what other question? You choose.
Yes, over there?
After you were given an assignment for a proper costume, were you told that you didn't have enough funds to build it the way you wanted to, so you had to get super creative?
Practically every time, yeah. You really have to be quite inventive on the way you do things on a show like Doctor Who. And the challenge is never really figuring out how to do it. The challenge is always figuring out how to do it in the time or with the money available. So, yeah, pretty much every time, really.
Well, this weekend, have you seen, by the way, there's a costume contest. Who here wants to be in the costume contest? Anybody here going to join? It's a Who Be costume contest. The prizes are going to be actual little bits from the show itself. So if you're in a Doctor Who costume, you may actually want to join this costume contest because we're going to have bits from the show itself. We're going to have free passes to some conventions. We're going to have some very large prizes in this contest. So if you would like to join the costume contest, which will be judged during the final show and ceremonies between 5 and 7 tonight, just sign up at registration, which is where you got your little button at. Sign up there, and if you're, I believe the categories that we have will be doctors, companions, villains, monsters, and other. That kind of covers everything, especially the other. So sign up for that because you're going to have your costume judged by the king of cosplay himself, Mr. Robert Allsoop, the fellow who probably designed the thing you're wearing.
Or at least made it, maybe.
Or at least made it. At least hot glue.
It's a good point to make a distinction because I've never been the costume designer on Doctor Who. I've always been a maker, but quite often I've got to have design influence.
Well, what's the difference?
The huge difference. The costume designer on Doctor Who is a really important person. They get a screen credit. They're in charge of all the costumes on the show, whereas I just get allocated certain things to make, and sometimes it's working from a drawing that the designer's done, or sometimes the designer will let me have a lot of creative input, and I'll do my own drawings and show them to the designer and say, is that the kind of thing you want? And hopefully they'll go, yeah, great. And so things like the new Time Lords, for example, I did the drawing for them, but I'm not the costume designer. The designer chose the fabrics, or a lot of them, I chose some, and it's a real collaborative thing quite often. So technically I'm a maker rather than a designer, but I just get to have a bit of input sometimes.
Well, I'm glad this maker made it here to our Chandler Fest. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks.
Come see Robert again. He'll be on stage at 3 p.m. in the panel Night Terrors, Impossible Astronauts, and and the Robot of Sherwood. Robert Allsoop and New Doctor Who. I like Robert of Sherwood, actually. That's a good work. So see you in a few hours. Coming up next in this room, we have an interview with a gentleman who is one of the directors of Dragon Con. He has been a zombie 9 times on Walking Dead. He also has been a zombie in Zombieland, Tony Gowell. So if you would like to see that interview, it'll be in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Allsoop, for joining us.
Thank you.
An absolute pleasure and an honor to share stage with you. Thank you, Guardians, for making this possible. And thank all of you.